More and more people these days are working past age 65. So when you do that, what about Medicare? Because Medicare is supposed to start when you turn 65. And there are certain scenarios that can really mess this up, and you don't want to create a problem for your Medicare enrollment when you need to do it. And if you're going to continue working past age 65, you likely don't need to sign up for Medicare. You would likely stay on your employer's health plan as long as they're paying a good chunk of your premium, if not all of your premium. You're likely going to want to stay on that health plan. But there are definitely some mistakes, some big mistakes that can come along if you don't do it correctly. I'm going to go through those mistakes right now just to make sure that we don't bump into them. And we want to make sure that when we are ready for Medicare, it's nice and easy and it's exactly as if we are turning 65. So the first mistake, and it's kind of a big one, it's kind of a difficult one. There's a line on whether or not you're supposed to stay on your group coverage when you work past age 65. And that line is 20 employees, meaning if you work for a small employer that has 19 or fewer employees, you're supposed to get off the plan and go into Medicare. If you work for a larger employer with 20 or more employees, you're likely going to stay on the plan and not go into Medicare. So that complicates things right off the bat. In other words, at that small employer, Medicare is primary, meaning Medicare is going to be the payee or the payor on your health insurance versus whatever you have at work. So if you keep what you have at work, they're not going to pay because Medicare is primary. So here we reach the question, how do we know how many employees our employer has? How does he file his probably a UCT6 form? And that's not a question I can answer. It's a question that you are going to need help probably from your employer with on how to figure that out. It really is a crazy rule within Medicare that they would set it up that way and leave it to you to figure out how many employees your employer has. So if you have an employer that has 19 or fewer employees, Medicare is primary. So you want to get off your group plan, go into Medicare. If it's 20 or more, you could still get off that plan and go into Medicare. But if your employer is paying a large chunk of your premium, maybe even all your premium, then you would likely stay on, and that plan would be primary. Medicare would be secondary. So in that circumstance, you really don't want any part of Medicare because it's really not going to coordinate with your employer coverage, but you want to figure out whether it makes sense to stay on. Sometimes, if your employer is not paying a big chunk and your coverage isn't great, it still makes sense to come into Medicare because Medicare is really good and it's not terribly expensive. So if you want to compare, just give us a call. We'll figure out which makes more sense and then make sure that we do it correctly. Now, let's assume we're going to stay on our employer coverage. That's great. If you're working at that larger employer, you may likely also have a HSA account, a health savings account. If you do, you cannot start any part of Medicare. So you cannot start Part A, and you definitely don't want to start Part B. I'll talk more about that in a second. But you don't want to start any part of Medicare. Another really silly rule that Medicare has is you must stop contributions into a health savings account 6 months before Medicare starts. Again, crazy scenario, which, if you're going to come in at age 65, not too big of a deal because you can stop it 6 months before you turn 65. But when you go working past age 65, you don't necessarily know when you're going to stop working and come into Medicare. You may all of a sudden, number one, you could get laid off, you could get fired, you could get terminated and have to start Medicare tomorrow or the first of next month. And there you have that situation where you could have been still contributing to a health savings account and you're forced into Medicare. It really is a crazy rule. I'm not sure. It's one of the dumber rules that Medicare has, and I'm not sure really the benefit from it to them, but you will have a penalty on that HSA money, and that's not a penalty that I can really explain. It's more of an accountant issue on how you will be penalized on contributions made into an HSA within 6 months of enrolling into Medicare. So just understand the point. And again, another drawback to that is, let's say you're still working into your 70s and you know you're going to retire next year. And you don't necessarily want to give your employer a heads up, but when you initiate to stop contributing to an HSA account, certainly any HR department that has been around for a while kind of knows that means probably in 6 months you're going to be retiring. So it is a situation, but it's there. So we have to deal with it. So understand that you will be penalized from a tax standpoint on HSA contributions made within 6 months of enrolling into Medicare. So understanding that. Now, when we get to Medicare Part B, this is a big one. So if you're going to continue working at an employer, and I've seen it too many times where people do, they stay working and they sign up for Medicare, A and B, and because it's something they think they have to do when they turn 65, and it's not, and you absolutely do not want to do it. Number one, Part B has a premium, and you would be paying that premium without any value to it. So it wouldn't be doing you any good to have it, and you'd be paying for it along the way. Number two, Medicare Part B is a trigger. So if you're past age 65, and let's say you're 72, 76, whatever it may be, and you then start your Medicare Part B, it makes it just like you're turning 65. So your window is open coming into Medicare, so you can pick whatever options you want without having medical underwriting. If you have already started Part B, even though it didn't do you any good and you're paying for it and that's damage already, it also takes away that window to be able to choose what you want when you come into Medicare. So if you're going to stay at work, employer 20 or more, you're going to stay on that group health plan, you really don't want to start A, you really don't want to start B, you don't want to start any part of Medicare. Just make sure that everything just stays dormant until you're ready to actually come into Medicare. Another issue that can arise if you're working past age 65, you're on group health insurance, is not maintaining that coverage until you're ready to come into Medicare, or have a lapse in that coverage in the middle. You must have continuous coverage before you come into Medicare, or else you could face issues as well when you're coming into Medicare. And where that might happen is if you change jobs. If you're 67 and you go from one employer to another employer, and maybe there's a waiting period for their health insurance and you have a lapse of coverage in the middle, it can be problematic when it comes time to come into Medicare. So just keep that in mind. You must have continuous group coverage, which is considered creditable coverage, coming into Medicare. Another issue that needs to be addressed is when you are ready to come into Medicare, you need to prove that you had that coverage. So you need what is called a employer coverage form. It's an L564 form that generally your HR department will fill out. And again, here we are giving them a heads up that we're going to retire. You have to get this form filled out by your HR department that says, yes, you have had creditable coverage, group health insurance, for however long you've been past age 65 coming into Medicare. So that just means we need to do this earlier. So we want to get a 3, 4, 5 month head start on this stuff just to make sure it goes nice and easy when it's time for us to transition from work into Medicare. We can help with that. The form's on my website. We walk you right through it. You just go to MedicareOnVideo.com, the guides and forms section. You open it up and it's right in there. You can download it, give it to your HR department. Hopefully they're helpful. Sometimes they aren't. Sometimes they are. You know, if you're having trouble, let us know and we can help walk you through it as well. Now, kind of related to that, a big problem that I see far too often is people that get on COBRA coverage or retiree coverage. So understand, when you're coming into Medicare after age 65, you need what is called creditable coverage, which is group health insurance. It is not COBRA insurance. It is not retiree insurance. Now, if you're on retiree insurance, you may likely be on that for the rest of your life. You may never need to come into Medicare with retiree insurance. Although I've seen problems there before also, where somebody's been on it for 10 years, then all of a sudden the company disappears or the plan disappears or their retirement benefits disappear. And that causes a problem coming into Medicare. COBRA, on the other hand, sometimes if you're going to retire or maybe they're pushing you into retirement, they may offer to pay for COBRA for a number of months. But again, COBRA is not considered to Medicare creditable coverage. And it's, again, beyond me why, because it's real health insurance, exactly the same thing as your group plan, except the employer's not paying for it, you're paying for it. But in this case, your employer might be paying for it. But it's another situation that you need to be aware of. So don't be on COBRA coverage for 6 months after you retire and then come into Medicare, because it's going to cause a problem with your Medicare Part B initiation. So those are a handful of mistakes that come along. And again, we eliminate the mistakes. We make it easy. We make sure we get all the I's crossed or the T's crossed and the I's dotted when you're coming in Medicare. And that's what you want, because you don't want a problem. You want to get it done, have it do exactly what you want it to do, and then really not think about it for the rest of your life. And that's pretty much what we do for everybody that we deal with, is many, many happy people that just don't have to think about their health insurance. And it's terrific when you set it up correctly. So just make sure that we do the things we're supposed to do when we're supposed to do them, and we're here to help with that. So if you have any questions, reach out. We're happy to help with it. Hope you found the video helpful. Have a fantastic day.